Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. This has been a very anticipated event, so I'm really excited for you all to hear from Greg this evening about contract negotiation. My name is Lauren Oshman. I am one of the partners at Vestia. For those of you who are clients at Vestia Personal Wealth Advisors, you know that we have a few different companies under our umbrella that provide different services to doctors. So Vestia Contract Negotiation, Vestia Personal Wealth Advisors, they are named similarly because they do fall under the same umbrella. Just kind of my fine print disclosure, there is compensation sharing that happens between those companies. However, you do not have to be a Vestia Personal Wealth Advisors client in order to engage Greg with Vestia Contract Negotiation for help on your contracts. This is also, tonight though, we will talk high level about some strategy around tax, legal, financial planning portions of your contract. This is not meant to be tax, legal, or financial planning advice. So if you have a tax question, you should consult your accountant. If you have a legal question, consult your attorney. Have your financial planner help you put it all together. Do not take any of Greg's advice as being any of those things. Now that I have my fine print out of the way, we have about 60 minutes of content prepared for you tonight. We do have 90 minutes allotted before we will cut things off. This will be better with your questions. So I know a lot of you who are signed up to listen tonight do have contract negotiation on the horizon. Please use the Q&A box of the webinar that should be over in the little corner of your screen. You can chat in questions to me. I'll be monitoring those through the course of the event, and I will stop Greg and ask your questions as they come in. If we have too many questions to get to them all within the allotted time, I will make sure that we follow up with you, and Greg will get you an answer to your question. So definitely send those in. We will make sure you get an answer, whether it's live tonight or after the fact. I am recording this, so we will also have a recording available for you within a few days. If you have to duck off, if you have an early start tomorrow and you can't make it the full length tonight, or if your kids need your attention or whatever, feel free to jump off. You will get the full recording after the fact. All right, so why are we here tonight? Because we at Vestia Personal Wealth Advisors, our goal is to help doctors build wealth without regret. What does that mean? We want to help you build wealth without looking back and realizing that you were working so much, you didn't take time to do things that maybe are more important, like spend time with your loved ones or work out or other hobbies that you may have. There are a couple different ways that you can make more money doing what you do. One is to go do more work. The other is to go make more money doing the work you already do, right? Athletes have this figured out. We see headlines all the time about these big deals that athletes have negotiated. They're not the ones doing it, right? They have agents who know what they're worth, who know what they're going to bring to the team, and who help them make sure that they're getting paid top dollar for the work that they're doing. We realized that there was a gap in the market for someone helping doctors with negotiation, right? I've been on webinars that are attorneys talking to doctors about what to look for and kind of the legal of your contract, or financial workshops that talk about kind of how to figure out what you're worth. What's not out there in abundance is, what do you actually do when you get in the room? How do you actually conduct an effective negotiation so that you can execute your plan? And Greg will show you it actually goes sooner than that in having a great plan. So what Greg offers through Vestia Contract Negotiation is really the ability to help coach doctors through their negotiations. Or if you're someone who's like, yeah, this sounds great, I'm not going in there, he can go do it for you. He'll talk about what that looks like, and he'll talk about how he does it, but he's a professional. So you don't want to hear from me tonight. You want to hear from him. Without further ado, I will turn it over to the man of the hour. Greg Allen, take it away.
Thanks, Lauren. So just to give you a little background on myself and kind of how I came to this point, I've been doing negotiation professionally for a long time. I was doing some postgraduate negotiation training and learning at Harvard, and I ran into a guy named Tommy Martin, who many of you may know is the CEO of Vestia. And we actually were paired together in some of our negotiation exercises, and it was a lot of fun. Tommy tells a lot of stories about what that was from his side, but from my side, it was a lot of fun to go through that process. Fast forward to a couple of years later, I have a younger brother who is an orthopedic surgeon, and he was getting ready to take his first job out of his fellowship, and he called me and said, "Hey, you do contracts all the time. Can you look at my contract and see if you can help me out?" So I took his contract and I spent several hours on it. I came back to him and I had notes on almost every section of the agreement. And I told him, "Look, I wouldn't agree to this. Language is bad. We need to fix this." And we went through the compensation and figured all that out. And I gave him back a playbook and said, "Here's how I would go in and negotiate that." So he went in and followed the playbook and came back with most of everything that we wanted to get out of the negotiation for him. And he showed that to Vestia and said, "Hey, here's my contract." And they said, "Wow, this looks really good. Who helped you with this?" And here I am. Now I do it for all the Vestia clients. So that's just a little bit about me. I look forward to spending this time with you guys tonight. And please ask any and all questions. This is much better if it's interactive versus just listening to me ramble on for 60 minutes. So with that, we'll go ahead and start through the deck. It's very high level. I kept it as simple as possible, just trying to spend more time talking about the hows and whats versus, you sitting here trying to read through a bunch of bullets on a slide. But really, the way we want to go through this is, what do you do before, during, and after the negotiation? And then I have what I call Greg's golden rules. And these are just things that you should keep in mind, not only in negotiations regarding your personal compensation or your employment contract, but just in life. When it comes to negotiation. Negotiation is something that happens for each of us on a regular basis. We don't recognize it all the time. Sometimes it just comes as second nature, but very few people, aside from a few of us that are a little off, I guess, look forward to negotiations as a positive experience. It's like, I don't really want to do that. Think of like buying a car or any of these types of situations that people dread. This is things you can remember in all those situations so that you can come out with a good result. So with that, we'll kind of start into the dialogue talking about before the negotiation. If you want to advance for me there, Lauren. So the biggest thing about being successful in negotiation is preparation. When I guide people on contract negotiation or negotiation scenario planning, I use a rule of thumb which might shock a lot of people, but I say for every 1 hour that you plan to be in a negotiation, you need to spend about 6 hours preparing. And that is so that you've thought your way through all the scenarios and you come in with a lot more confidence when you are prepared to have that conversation versus just showing up on the spot and trying to wing it, as they say. And I have a kind of a structured approach here of how we go through and build a negotiation strategy and build a negotiation plan. And so we'll walk through each one of these steps, and I'll give you some real world examples of what this might look like, how it can be used, and how it might be relevant to your specific situation. So the first thing that we want to look at is the interests of both parties. So your own interest and the party that you're negotiating with. And you want to think through it from sitting in their chair and sitting in your chair. So what do they want out of this? What looks like a good, successful outcome to them? And what is a successful outcome to you? And I would write those things down. There's a number of different ways in which this can come out. They could have a specific interest that says, we want to staff this position with a position from a specific school, from a specific specialty, and we want them staffed by this point. And then they probably have a financial target of where they want you to come in. All of those are the interests of the other party. Then you want to think about your interests. I want to live. What kind of quality of life do I want to have? How much work do I want to do? What do I want my compensation level to be? And just list all these out, because what you're going to do is you're going to look for the areas where there are similarities in those interests and the areas where there are differences in those interests. A recent example of a negotiation was related to COVID. Had a physician that was scheduled to start work at a certain point, and the hospital that he was to join continued to push out the start date due to concerns around COVID. So that was a negotiation. We had to think, well, what is their interest? They're trying to delay paying him. Is there some other concern? Are they looking at other ways to approach this situation? And so we had to think through, what are the interests? He wants to start working, they may want to delay it. What are the similarities? Where are the opportunities there to build on common interests? And where are the points that are going to most likely become a negotiation point between the two parties? After you've kind of completed that area, looking through those interests and feel like you've adequately covered all the aspects of it, then we look at options and flexibility. Where do I have flexibility? What options am I willing to put on the table? And what might they have in the way of flexibility or in options to them? We can think through this in a number of different ways, but I like to think of it as saying, these options are things that I am relatively indifferent between this option or that option. There can be options that are not as desirable or options that are equal to or better than others. And so you kind of put them in a stack rank as you think through that process. And then what are the areas that there might be an interest on the other side on an option that you are willing to be flexible on, but are largely indifferent to what happens in that scenario. So those are, you want to think through each of those and come up with as many options as you can, because as you're in the moment of negotiation, having something structured to look back onto as alternate ways of accomplishing the same goal is better than trying to think them up in the moment as you're sitting across the table or on the phone with the other party. And then the part that is, I think, often the next step is looking at logic and legitimacy. This is what I think is key. Emotion is easy to argue with. Facts and logic are very hard to argue with. So as you think through, why is the point I'm asking for, or the things I'm asking for, where is the logic behind it, and where is the legitimacy that I'm asking for something that is reasonable, realistic, fair, in the range of agreement, versus it's completely left of that. It's completely out of reason and will get dismissed very quickly in a negotiation. We have tools here at Vestia. There are tools in the marketplace to help you build that logic and legitimacy, looking at compensation structures, looking at market data, looking at cost of living figures, all of the things that go around supporting whatever your ask may be. And as you bring that forward in a logical and legitimate way, it's very hard for them to say, no, we can't agree to that. You're providing it in a factual format. You're providing it in a way that says, here's how I got my data. Here's where my data is from. You're welcome to go check it. But it provides a way for you to put a foundation behind your argument that becomes very difficult to push you off of, because you have that. And this is the part where I also, when I'm talking to a lot of doctors, there are a lot of doctors that are very humble, or not one that wants to toot their own horn. This is where I make them bring out the big old trombone and blow it as loud as they can, because this helps me understand all the other valuable pieces that you bring to your specific situation that make you stand out from other candidates that they can't get from another candidate. Or if you have phenomenal production numbers, or you have a certain specialty or training that others don't have, this is where we want to set you apart from the average client, or the average doctor, or the average employee that they're looking at in this situation. And so I have to drag it out of some clients, because they say, well, I think I get paid fairly, and I'm looking at the data saying, you're not being paid fairly. Like, let's talk about this. Like, where's your production? Oh, and often I have this conversation. Do you realize you are producing in the 75th percentile and you're being paid at the 15th percentile? How does that feel to you being told you? It doesn't take long to spin that pretty quickly to where they're like, you're right, I am a great doctor. I am worth more than what I'm getting paid. And so that's part of this focus on logic and legitimacy, is to say, what sets you apart? why are you worth what we're asking for, and what backs that case up. And that helps us have a very strong foundation from which we negotiate from, and it makes it very hard for them to move us off of that position because we have the facts on our side. And that this is where that preparation comes in. Most people don't walk into a negotiation with that level of detail, facts, legitimacy, backup support. They're just, well, we've never done that. That's an argument I hear a lot of times. We've never agreed to that. Okay, well, there's a first time for everything. Let's start there. So this is where that preparation really helps set you up for success. Next is alternatives. There's a phrase that's used quite frequently in negotiation. It's called Batna. You've probably heard of it before, but it stands for best alternative to a negotiated agreement. We'll talk about that during the negotiation, but in alternatives, this is if this does not work out, what are my other options? And you may have multiple job offers. You may have 3 or 4 different hospitals in the same general geographic area that may have made offers to you. And this is where you look at, what do I already have in the bag and I know I can go get, versus where do I want to get in this negotiation. And the key here is, as you're preparing this, you want to and you have to think about the other side's Batna as well. What's their alternative to hiring you? Are there other candidates in the pipeline? Are you the only one they're talking to? What's the time to locate and find another client? All of those things are part of this buildup on alternatives, because the whole preparation is making your Batna look as good as possible and theirs look as bad as possible, so that you strengthen your case and weaken theirs, so that you say, look, I can walk away from this deal. I've got a better alternative. You don't. So you need to work with me to get through this negotiation in order to make this work out for you well, because you've strengthened your case, weakened theirs. That's the bottom line in exploring the alternatives portion of this. And then we want to look at commitments. Oftentimes negotiations are not a one conversation process. Sometimes it's iterative. We make progress on 2 or 3 points. We have to come back on 3 or 4 others. We come to some tentative agreement on a portion of the contract, but we need to come back to others. This commitment is, what are we trying to accomplish today or in this conversation? What commitment am I looking to get? It may be just a commitment for a follow-up. It may be, I want to get this part of the contract agreed to and come back to other portions later. So you want to detail out, what exactly are we trying to accomplish in this particular negotiation, and what commitment are we trying to receive from the other side that says we met our goal for today. So that's it. And then after you've kind of thought through what commitment are you trying to get, think about the relationship. Is there a relationship already with the other side of the negotiation, or is this a new relationship? And then, what is the future going to hold? Is this a relationship that matters? Am I ever going to see this person again? Am I negotiating with the managing partner of the practice I'm trying to join, or am I negotiating with their business manager, who I probably will never contact again, other than when my contract comes up for renewal, I'll see them again. So does relationship matter? And the reason why that's important is, if the relationship matters, you're going to approach the negotiation in a different way. If the relationship does not matter, then you can be a little bit more disagreeable. You can be a little bit more firm in your statements. You can be a little bit more ornery, for a lack of a better word, because you're not investing in where that future relationship goes. I think of this like in a real world example, when you're buying a car. Unless it's your next door neighbor that you're buying the car from at the dealership, you're probably never going to see that person again. And it probably doesn't matter that they like you, don't like you, whatever. You just want to walk out of there paying as little as possible for the vehicle that you want. And so you would treat that relationship different than you have a negotiation with your mother-in-law, your father-in-law. Those relationships are ones you're going to want to invest in. So you're going to approach those negotiations a little bit different than the ones that you're never going to, the relationship doesn't matter. And then the last thing to think through is, how is this negotiation going to take place? Is it face-to-face? Is it going to be over the phone? Is it going to be on a video chat? Is it going to be pieces of it through email? There's a number of different means, and each one has things to be concerned about or things to watch out for, because in my opinion, nothing substitutes for a face-to-face sitting across the table from someone negotiation. When I'm sitting in a room, I can read their body language, I can read their tone, I can read their reaction, I can see how I might need to adjust or pivot where we're headed in a negotiation or on a strategy based on the direct feedback I get from them. Second, is best is on the phone, because I can still hear tone, I can still feel how they're reacting or responding. In my opinion, email communication is the worst, because tone is always going to be misinterpreted. People may take things out of context. Your words may come back to haunt you because they're documented and they're written down. So those are kind of the order, but you have to think through. Sometimes you don't have a choice as to how this negotiation is going to take place. Sometimes for speed, you may be in a different time zone that's halfway around the world from the person you're going to negotiate with, and finding a way to sync up times is just not going to happen. And so there's portions of it that have to happen via email. Then you just have to make sure you're very careful on your wording, your choice of phrases, anything that you're going to do. So each of those methods or modes of communication have things that you need to keep in mind as you prepare for that next negotiation and the way in which you'll be communicating with the other party. So I'll pause there for a second. I don't know if there are questions or if I'm moving too rapidly through the topic. I want to make sure we have plenty of time, but I'll let that sink in for a second. If there's any questions, you can put them in the chat, and Lauren can relay those along. But that is the things that you want to keep in mind before the negotiation. This is all prep work. You'll want to also make sure you've gone through the contract documents, anything that's been provided to you in writing, the offer. Make all your red lines, go through and make all your comments so that you know where you want to go. And in that options and flexibility, what I like to do with clients as we go through this is color code everything through the document that we want to change in by value. Green being the most important, yellow being secondary, and red being those that are either going to be pretty hard for us to get or we're indifferent to whether we get them or not. And then we build out that deck, and then when we think of it from the other party's side, we always want to trade a green on our side for a red. So something I don't care about for something I care a lot about. And knowing and having thought through what's important to them helps you know, hey, this is really important to them, but it's not that important to me, but I'm going to make it feel like it's really important to me so that when I give in on this, I'm going to get something big back in return. So that's the preparation side before the negotiation. We want to.
Greg, I do have a couple questions. I have a couple questions that have come in. One, how do you find out your value as a physician to a hospital?
So the easy way to look at it, the value to the hospital, you want to think about what your practice is, what your specialty may be, how important is that to the hospital? Do they have a high level of clientele there? Is it a new area they're wanting to expand into? One example, I had a doctor. He was an orthopedic surgeon, and he was a trauma orthopedic surgeon. And the hospital that was wanting to hire him was carried the moniker of a level 1 trauma center. And without him, they could not put that moniker on their hospital anymore. And that brought a lot of clients from the local area. And so those types of things are how you know I have tremendous value to this hospital. You can look at production, your billing, how those billings are translating on their side to revenue. So there's a number of different ways to kind of break apart different pieces of your value. Are you providing administrative oversight to other staff members? Do you hold a staff position? Are you the the chief of residence or any of those types of other positions that bring incremental value? Are you a part of the quality standard setting organization? Are you part of their quality or their customer feedback panels? Any of these types of things provide incremental value to the hospital, and we need to go then take a look at all of the things that are done, and how do we monetize that value back to the hospital, or in reputational value, or in different ability to serve different clients, different types of needs in the community. All of those things are how you determine value, your value to the hospital specifically.
And I've got a related question asking about the availability. It's the metrics you were talking about with the percentiles, that those are not easily available to physicians to know how they compare to others. So how do you get that information?
Well, they're really easily available to Vestia. So I would say come to us and we help you provide that information. We can run reports that talk about where it is for your specific region of the country, and also how that compares nationally. So what I like to do as I'm working with clients is I'll look at the national numbers and I'll look at the regional numbers, and whichever one is more favorable to you is the one that we use as our baseline for our logic and legitimacy. If the region numbers are significantly higher than the national numbers, those are the ones we lead with. If the national numbers are better, we're going to lead with the national numbers. But that is something that's readily available through Vestia, through your personal wealth advisor, or through the contracts side. We have access to various sites of data. Hospitals will sometimes come in with that data as a backup to why they're offering what they are, and they use a blended rate, or they'll do other things to do kind of the opposite of what I just talked about. How do they drive that value to the lowest point possible to show you that they've used benchmarks to get there? And so that's where our preparation and our negotiation is, to move them off of that number and get them to a number that we're comfortable with.
And then I've got a couple of questions around negotiating, and I know you're going to talk about this some later, so you can feel free to defer, Greg, to a later section, but I've got a couple questions that have come in around, is it possible to negotiate with an academic medical center? Do you do that? Does professional negotiation, is that a thing with academic medical centers? And then just the idea of setting precedent for future hires in academic centers who are going to be hiring large departments.
So you'll see this later from me, but when someone says something is not negotiable, you just started a negotiation. That's the way I look at it. So everything is negotiable. Yes, you can negotiate with academics. There is also data available on benchmarking for academic positions. So that is also available, and there wouldn't be data available if there wasn't a range in what people pay and compensate for in academic institutions. I have done a handful of negotiations with academic institutions on doctor compensation in those, and it's also not only just on the rate, but also on what's encompassed within the job scope, and what are the other areas for compensation other than just a straight salary. If there's other outside lectures and other things that are being done, how are those being compensated for? So yes, you can negotiate with academic institutions. I have done that on a couple of occasions, and data exists to provide for benchmarking as well in those areas.
Perfect. All right, let's move on.
All right. Yeah. And now you're in the negotiation. You're in the heat of the moment. What do you do? How do you avoid, the panic moment, the freeze moment, the giving in when you're not where you want to be? So these are some things that I think is a soundtrack that should be running through your mind as you sit in the negotiation, because all of these help strengthen your position. The first one is remember the power of silence. People do not like silence. Most people get very, very uncomfortable if there is silence in a conversation. The more comfortable you can become in silence, the better it will be for you, because people will begin to speak to fill the gap. They'll fill the space with information, with whatever they have, to move off of the awkward silence that may be sitting there. And you're not trying, it's not a gimmick or a tactic. You're really trying to ascertain additional information that for you will be very beneficial as you move through the negotiations. I consider this like the sponge phase. You want to just absorb as much content and information from them as you can, because they will be saying things that they probably didn't plan to say or didn't intend to say. And you'll find people in uncomfortable silence negotiating with themselves. And that's a great place to be. They'll say, well, we could never agree to that. And then you sit there and you kind of cock your head a little bit. You think about it for a second and they go, well, I guess I won't say never, because, we can't, there are exceptions. And you're, okay. And then they'll go, we can agree to that. I mean, it's literally amazing how fast people will back off of these hard and fast positions when they're uncomfortable. So you want to remember the power of silence as you there. You can't just sit there and say nothing for the entire negotiation, because that will cease to be effective. But use it selectively. Use it in those moments of where you feel the conflict rising or you feel the tension building a little bit. It's an easy way to ease the tension on your side and raise the tension level on their side. So again, it's not this isn't The Office and it's Michael Scott's 10 tips in negotiation and he pulled off Wikipedia. This is just human nature. So as you become comfortable in that, it helps you a lot. You always want to focus on logic and not emotion. When you can stay in logic, it's very hard to get, the other side may start to feel emotional because your logic is sound and they don't have a place to go and they're getting frustrated. But as long as you can keep it focused on logic and not emotion, then that will work to your benefit. Using an example outside of the medical field, I was recently in a negotiation where one party that we were working with was a high reputation firm, and they were trying to convince us that we should use them for a particular business interaction, and they were talking down about the capability of their competitors, in that they're better than their competitors are in quality and everything like that. And they kept calling other people, these other ones, like hack jobs, and they couldn't do the job right, and so they had to do these terrible techniques. And I was listening to them go on and on. They were filling the silence. And I came back just quickly and said, so if you're better than all of these other people, then you should be able to perform this job the way we're asking it to be done without it being a hack job, correct? They had talked themselves into a corner. There was no way they could respond other than, exactly, yes, we can do it that way. So they had said, we're not going to do it that way. And then by continuing to talk about how good they were at doing everything, it was easy for me to say, okay, well, if anyone can do it, you can. So and they had put themselves into a position where, like, listening and being that sponge, their words were able to help us get to the resolution we needed to. The next one is the Batna. You never, ever want to agree to a contract or a situation that is worse than your Batna. And people do it all the time. They forget that, hey, my alternative is to walk and do this other thing, which is better than where I'm at now. There's something called the inertia of the deal. People get into the negotiation. They feel this need to get closure. They want to end on a good note, and they'll agree to something that's worse than what their alternative was to just walking away. Again, just to make it simplistic, you have a job offer that's offered you, $200,000, and you've already you already know that that's a given, and it's roughly the same place. You kind of have a slight nudge to work at this one, but then you go in the negotiation, you agree to take a $175,000 job at a place that's essentially the same because you forgot that your alternative was better. And that's where you have to have the willingness, the courage to say, I'm sorry, this just isn't going to work, and you take your alternative. Not every negotiation comes out exactly how you want it to, but keeping that's kind of like once you've beaten your Batna, now you're playing with house money. When you're below your Batna, you walk away, you fold. You don't want to take that deal because you have something better that's elsewhere. Remember that you control the flow of the meeting, of the conversation. At any point, if the conversation is going going left or right and not the way you want it to go, you always have the ability to call a timeout and say, I'm sorry, this is not going the way I want it to. We're going to need to reconvene this meeting. They can use different types of pressure. Well, we got to have this decided today. Well, this is not where we want to go, and I don't think this is going to be beneficial for either of us to try to force a situation through today just for the sake of meeting an artificial deadline. I think it'd be better if we park this. And so when I'm coaching a negotiation and I'm not actually doing it on behalf of a physician, this is the call timeout, use your lifeline, call me, tell me where it's going, how it headed off the rails, what was said, and then we'll redirect the strategy. How do we bring it back to our point? How do we refocus the conversation where we want it to go? How do we remove the roadblock they may have thrown in there? There's a conversation, there's a technique in negotiation, it's called anchoring. Sometimes someone will drop an anchor that says, this is where we're going to agree. And oftentimes the zone of agreement oscillates right around that anchor. Unless you take a stick of dynamite and you blow up that anchor and you replant your anchor in a completely different place. That's what this you control the flow is. They dropped an anchor. I don't like where this is going. How do we reform the discussion? How do we rebuild our case? How do we think about this differently? They threw out a piece of information that I was not aware of, I didn't have access to. How do we and that's where we want to reestablish the new starting point. The next one is test potential solutions before agreeing. This is a way when you're having conversations, if they throw out a scenario, hey, we can work with you on this, but we need you to agree to this. Okay, if I was to agree to that point, what could you do on this other point? You're not agreeing, you're saying, what would that look like? And that's how you test to see, well, if you could agree to that, we could agree to this. And then you're seeing, is that trade worth it to me? Is that of value? But I haven't agreed to anything yet. I've given an indication that I'm considering it, but I have not agreed. And this is how you can test potential solutions. And you can do this on a number of points. You could say, okay, I think I understand where you are on this. And I'm not agreeing at this point, but let's park that for now, and we'll come back to that point. But let's talk about this point. And then, okay, so assuming that, and then you can say, assuming that first point we talked about works, how does this one work? And you can start to string together various pieces of the negotiation to make sure it lines up in your favor the way you want it to end without agreeing to anything along the way. Because when you sequentially agree to items in the contract, you give away, you have less leverage to bring the closure to the items at the end. And usually people want to get through all the easy stuff, the less controversial topics, to get to the really meaty ones at the end. And if you've given away all your opportunities to compromise or to have a concession strategy, when you get to the end, you got nothing left in the tank. And that's when you have, now what do I do? So that's why you want to test these solutions before you agree to anything. So you can park it, you can say, okay, I think we've talked about that point enough. Let me think about it. We'll come back to that. But now you kind of know the range of where you're going to be on that point. Let's move to the next point. And you keep doing that until you've kind of boxed in each of the points and then you start threading them together on how you want to close out the deal. And the last one I want to talk about during the negotiation is having a concession strategy. You're not going to, well, I'll say, rarely are you going to be able to walk in and walk away with all the chips and say, you got nothing and I got it all. Those are nice when they happen. It doesn't happen that frequently, but sometimes it does. You find someone in a desperate situation, or you really are all that, and they're willing to pay whatever. But it doesn't happen most of the time. There's some give and take in a negotiation. So some of the things I want you to think about, there are how you concede points tells the other side a lot of information. So you have to think through this carefully. And as you go through the negotiation, keep track of any concessions that you've made, because oftentimes you need to remind the other party what a great negotiation partner you have been and what you've conceded to this point. And you can stack those things up to trade for something significant on the other side. Again, these are not things you've agreed to. They're potential concessions that you've discussed at this point. But look, if I'm able to give on this and this and this, I need you to come meet me on this, which is the big one that we want. I mentioned you need to leave something in the tank. You don't want to, burn it all out at the beginning and then you've got nothing left to trade with, and now you're into the most important parts of the contract that were the tough pieces that nobody wanted to deal with at the front. Every concession, regardless of how small, you need to make it grudgingly. Like, oh, God, this is killing me to give this up, and it's a red item, so it's, we're on our red list. It's something that's not really important to them, to us, but it could be very important to the other side. Everything is grudgingly. If you give up things too easily or too quickly, it signifies to the other side, this person either doesn't know what they're really wanting to do, or, hey, they'll give up easily on a lot of points, and if I just dig in my heels, this will all turn out well for my side of the equation. And you don't want to give big concessions. You want to give very small incremental concessions to signify, because either your logic gets flawed and they say there's no basis because they just gave up everything they've been spending all their time building their case for, or that signals that, hey, there's big concessions to be had elsewhere. So you really want to have a strategy around, hey, I really want to end up at this point. So if I start here, I'm only going to give little pieces because I want to stay very close to that number, because that's where my logic's based. That's where my foundational elements are, so that you end up in a good spot. And then you always want to trade for equal or greater value, relative value to you, relative value to the other side. You don't ever want to give up something that's really important to you for something that's very small on their side. You always want that to be working in the inverse, so that you're getting more than you're giving up relative to your personal value. It could be that they're getting much greater value, but to you, what you've given up is much less than what you're getting back. So have a concession strategy. Think through where they may be starting, where you may be starting. There's a book I'm reading right now, just for a visual reference here, if you can read this. You don't just go, okay, I'm at 50, you're at 25, let's go to 37.50. You don't just split the difference. You want to stay on your side of the equation, because that's where your logic and reason was based. And if you just go halfway with them, you kind of just argued against yourself for why we drove the line where we did for what we were seeking to achieve. So that's the things. So you have your playbook, you're walking through the negotiation. And like I said, this is the soundtrack in your mind as you're thinking through, how am I doing, assessing how you're doing in the negotiation, thinking of these points right here, and referring back to them. There's a lot of comfort that comes from some of these things, like knowing that you control the flow, knowing that you can test solutions before you agree. It takes the anxiety out of, I have to agree to this right now. You don't have to agree to this right now. You can park it, you can come back, and then you can think through, well, what am I willing to give to get what I want? And that's where the concession strategy comes in. That's why this is kind of an iterative process. Any questions on during the negotiation, Lauren?
I have a number of questions.
All right.
That have come in from the audience. First, how successful is it to negotiate the non-compete clause?
It varies, but I've had lots of success negotiating non-compete clauses. What we want to do is, when we negotiate non-competes, we want to make sure that whatever the most likely scenarios are for you, that you would have to, that you would be battling against a non-compete, you have solved for in the negotiation. For example, if you choose to start your own practice, can you do that? If you choose to, is there a reasonableness to the geographical boundary that they've drawn around a physical facility? Sometimes they say around any facility, and there's ways to weaken the non-compete such that it isn't really an issue for you, because you've thought through on the front side, what would I want to do if I was to leave this particular position? What would my most likely exit scenarios look like? And how do I ensure that under those exit scenarios, I am okay? I'm good with what my options are. Some of them you can, if you're in a highly lucrative practice and things like that, you can always look at, is there a liquidated damages clause where you could negotiate a buyout from that? And what I always want to make sure we protect for is if you are put in the worst case scenario where you are exited from a job through no fault of your own and it's not your desire to leave, you should be able to get out of a non-compete, because it is not. And that's, one of the things we try to do in the negotiation is make sure when it's all said and done, you can tuck that contract under your pillow and know that if the worst case scenario happens, I'm still going to be okay. And oftentimes people don't know what's in their contract. They don't understand what's in their contract. And they don't realize it until that worst case scenario happens. And when they pull it out, it's unfortunate what they find in there, because it's usually not to their benefit. So when you come to, this is again where logic and reason comes into it. If I'm sitting across from a practice and they have a fairly onerous non-compete clause, and I say, look, this non-compete should not apply if you choose to terminate this physician's employment and they've through no fault of their own. If you're downsizing the practice or doing whatever, they would choose to still work here. But because you're making a choice for them not to work here and it's not through a terminable offense, there's no reason why this should apply. You're choosing to not have this doctor here. You can't then lock them up to not be able to work. And those are very logical arguments. And I've had very few people that it's hard to stand out on a illogical limb for very long and feel comfortable. So that's where you say, you really just push the logic of that doesn't make sense. Hey, you've got a non-compete that is 300 miles around your hospital. You don't draw clients in for more than 20 miles outside the hospital. So it's ridiculous for it to be any longer than that, because moving to a practice that's 15 or 20 miles away does not upset your life. It allows you to stay with your family, stay in the same area, stay in the same, home. But if it's 150 miles, that's going to upset your life if that comes in. So it's not, you can't necessarily make it go away completely, but you can really lessen the painfulness, I would say, of that non-compete to a point where I'm good with all of these options. I have plenty of options that make me okay. I still have a non-compete. So the practice, the hospital, they still get to feel good that, hey, they tuck it under their pillow saying, I've got a non-compete. But guess what? 90% of the scenarios in which you would exit, you're protected for. So that's how I would approach it versus saying no non-compete. It's let's weaken that non-compete to the point that it's not really a concern. Yeah, there's a 10% scenario, but that's not likely. So again, making you feel comfortable that says, if the worst happens, I'm still in good shape.
All right. Is entering a negotiation for a particular job imply that you'll accept the job if they meet your request? So can you negotiate the contract and still be comparing it to other offers?
Absolutely. I always negotiate multiple offers at the same time because I'm going to start pitting them against each other at some point. I'm going to say, look, I'm talking to, St. Joe's down the street and St. Al's around the corner, and they both have better offers than you do. So I'm still interested in yours. I did this with a client not too long ago that had 3 competing offers in the same city. One was by far and away their choice that they wanted to go and work for. They liked the staff better, they liked the conditions better, they liked the hospital better. But the other 2, knowing that they were at disadvantages in those areas, were offering more money. And so you come to the point where you say, look, I really like the physicians there. I really like the hospital conditions. And if you can get near or at where these other offers are, it's a no-brainer. I'll come work with you. But I have a family to take care of. I have these other things to do. So that's a very logical, understandable negotiation. And absolutely, there is nothing offensive about negotiating multiple offers at the same time. You enter a negotiation because you're trying to get something better, and they have to assume that you are shopping other offers. So no, it's not offensive on either side, because they may use it to their advantage. They may say, we have offers out to you and 3 other doctors, and first one to the table wins. It happens on both sides of the equation. You just have to know your relative value and know they have to be legitimate offers. Like, you can't have an offer from 300 miles away and say, hey, this is in the same market, so your offer needs to be that. It needs to be credible, because some of these communities are pretty tight and people know who's talking to who and all that. So you don't ever want to get caught in a situation where you're bluffing and they call you on it, because then your credibility is gone. So I don't try to overplay my hand in any of those situations. I want to make sure we strengthen it to the best we can, but we don't step over the line of making false claims or something that could turn around on us.
Should you negotiate the same way if you don't have a BATNA?
Well, first, you don't ever tell them you don't. First, you don't ever tell them you don't have a BATNA. You always have a BATNA. It might not be very good. You just want to strengthen whatever you do have to the best ability that you can. And I rarely walk in and say, hey, my BATNA is this. It's an internal to me, and you can vaguely refer to it. Look, I've got other alternatives that I'm looking at. And right now, this is not as good as what my alternatives may be. That's very non-specific. It doesn't say what part of the alternative is better. Again, you want to give selected pieces of information that are true, that you have more information than they do. So you want to hold your cards. I'm using a lot of poker references. I don't play poker that much, but they seem to work really well here. You want to kind of keep it close to the vest so you understand what cards you're playing with, and they don't necessarily know. They just know you've thought through the process and you do have alternatives. You always have an alternative. An alternative is, I don't have a good offer right now. I'm not going to take a terrible offer because I know what my value is worth, and I'm going to keep looking. It's not the greatest of alternatives if you have medical school debt and bills and things in the family you need to take care of. It's not the best alternative, but it is an alternative. So you just want to make sure whatever your alternative is, you give it as strong of an appearance of as an option as you can, and then only take it when it's better than where you
are. How do you handle negotiations if my hospital says income is being cut across the board for all physicians due to COVID?
So I've actually dealt with this on a couple of physician situations. So what I try to do in that is I try to understand like the logic and rationale for why the cut is being made, how grounded in facts it is, and how much of it's just an emotional reaction. And then I want to understand the relative position strength of the physician I'm negotiating with. Not to say one position is more valuable than another, but if you happen to know your specific specialty is a huge profit generator or a huge revenue generator for the hospital, you're going to have a stronger case than if you're your specialty is a cost to the hospital to operate. It's a requirement. It's a needed service, but it's not one of the higher revenue generating specialties. So you want to understand all of those aspects. And then what I try to do is, if you get to the point of understanding, look, this is not avoidable, this is a must have, must happen, I look for how I get it back. Like, can I get it back in a repayment of that reduction 12 months from now? Can I get a higher bonus structure? Can I get some sort of another in-kind type of value trade? And most times the hospitals that are pushing a COVID type restriction, they don't want to do it any more than they are having to do it. It's uncomfortable for them. It brings kind of a feeling of disloyalty to the physicians on their firm. So if they have a way to be flexible, they'll usually take it. So on one of the physicians I negotiated with, it was a payback in full of any reduction in salary in 12 months as a bonus payout. And if the hospital has continued need on delay of that payback, then it just pushes out on a month-for-month basis until they're able to pay it back. But that reduction, the value just keeps growing on that payback, so that when they do trigger it, you get all your money back. And yes, there's a time value of money there, but it's better than just taking the cut and saying that's all I can do. There's physicians are brilliant individuals that spend all the time in medical school studying and understanding the science of the body, everything that has to go with it, but they don't get a business school training on the side to say, hey, think about how this is going to affect you. And so this is where, you want to provide the service to your patients, to the hospital, you want to do that. But if you were doing this for charitable donations, you wouldn't be engaging in negotiation, right? So you want to make sure, how do I get it back? How do I get it back when this is over? Okay, I'm going to be a team player, and I'm going to accept this salary reduction to help the hospital to make sure we maintain, wherever we need to do from a profitability or from a revenue perspective. But coming out the backside, I expect you to make it right, because I'm still doing the same level of work. I'm still doing the same amount of cases. I'm still doing everything that I was doing. So let's make it right on the backside. And then if they aren't willing to do exactly what you're asking for, I'll flat out ask sometimes, where do you have flexibility? What can you do to make up the difference here for what you're asking us to take? And oftentimes they'll volunteer, well, we've been able to get this approved, or we're doing this, we're going to create a bonus structure that didn't exist before, and we'll pay that out on the backside of this that should equal out to, if they're part of the solution, they're going to be much more willing to sign up to it than, if we're trying to craft it for them. So sometimes if all else fails, just ask really pointed questions that don't allow them to just say yes or no and walk away from it. They have to engage in a dialogue.
Perfect. So you mentioned playing offers against each other, and this question came in. If you are renegotiating a contract for a job that you already have and ideally like to keep, do you need to search out and get another offer, or can you work with what you already have to get more for the job you want to keep?
You can always work with what you have. You don't have to go seek out other offers. What's important to know is how likely are you to get other offers if you were to go seek them out. Like if you're in high demand, you're a high producer, you have networks that you can reach out to, you can always have the veiled, I won't say threat, but the veiled notion of, I really want to stay here and work, but I need to be compensated appropriately for what I do. And if I don't, then I'll have to look at exploring my other options to see what else is out there. I haven't done anything. I haven't made any contacts. I've just said I'm willing to do that. And that strengthens my Batna and lowers theirs, because now they know, hey, this person may walk. She's a great physician and we don't want to lose her. She does have options. She would get hired by anybody else quickly. We probably ought to work with her. I'm not threatening. I'm just saying, if we can't come to something that works, I may have to explore other options. It's very non-threatening, but it tells them you mean business and you want to have a meaningful dialogue.
Perfect. And then last question that's here right now. These are wonderful, so please keep them coming if there are things you're wondering about. How long does this negotiation process often take? Does this drag on for months? Is there some kind of average duration? And then how do you know when you've reached their final offer where you're not going to get more?
Okay, so the process can vary. It depends on at what pace you want to take it. I don't like to be down to the wire with a gun to my head saying I have to have a deal signed by next Friday. I prefer to back it up a few weeks or a month in advance of that and say, hey, contract's expiring in a couple months. I'm at a point where I need to decide whether I'm going to proceed forth with a renewal or whether I need to explore other options. So let's start it. I'd rather move at our pace versus their pace. And sometimes people use deadlines to their advantage. And in this case, the hospital or whatever may be using that, or practice may be using that to their advantage. So I'd rather it be on our timeline. I would say a good rule of thumb, depending on the size of the firm you're negotiating with and the availability of the other side, is probably a couple weeks. It's usually 2 or 3 dialogues. It's usually a couple of versions of contracts passing back and forth. I would say it's a couple of weeks. I would prefer to have at least a month's worth of buffer before the contract expires to get it done so that we're not down to the wire and all of a sudden there's a clock ticking against us. So that's my rule of thumb. Plan on a couple of weeks, a couple of versions of the contract moving back and forth, and give yourself at least an additional month from renewal date. So add, basically 2 months. I would start like 2 months before the contract expires. So you got a month to take your time and get through the contract in a non-hurried fashion and still have plenty of time in case something, bleeds over a little bit.
Perfect. All right. And then for, if you're starting first job, like as a resident or fellow coming out of training, you're going to need more lead time because once you get the contract agreed to, you're going to have to get your credentialing and all that kind of stuff. So it's going to be a little bit different timeline.
Yeah. And also there's ways to lock in compensation for yourself prior to starting a first-time job. If you're in high demand and they want you, the earlier you get your contract done, you can have them paying you some sort of a retainer fee between the time your contract finishes and the time you show up for work. So those are always good. And it's also quite comforting to know, hey, when I finish my residency in 6 months, I know where I'm going. And I can start planning my family in that direction or looking for homes or apartments or whatever it may be, and kind of planning your life and having the comfort and security of knowing I've got an offer in hand and I know where I'm going and it's done.
Perfect. All right, that's all we have at this point. So I will move to the next slide.
So after the negotiation. So this is, once the negotiation's done, you want to review your goals and how did the negotiation results compare with where you wanted to be. Are we way off base? Is there something that you really wanted that you didn't get that we need to circle back and revisit? And you want to also ensure that the final deal reflects all the agreed upon points. Contract negotiations are complex. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a chance that somebody missed something in one of the clauses that was an important negotiation point and just forgot to put it in. You always hope that's not done with malice, but there could be I forgot to put that red line in. I forgot to change that term. So you want to make sure the final deal reflects all the agreed upon points. If you have any concerns, we want to go back and clarify and say, now when we talked about this, what we agreed to was this, but the way this reads in the contract, that is not what we agreed upon. Can you please explain to me how you think this reflects what we had agreed upon in principle during the negotiation? Clarify those points. And I'm very pessimistic when it comes to a contract. I look at the contract and say, I look at it like it's either a divorce decree before you get married, or it's a prenuptial agreement that you want to know everything that's in there, because anything that they say, oh yeah, that's just wording we put in the contract, we don't ever actually enforce that. Well, guess what? When the worst case scenario happens, that don't worry about it is out the window and you're stuck with what's in the contract. So I always say, if they say don't worry about it, then say it's got to be not that big of a deal. Let's put the wording in the contract, because you may not be here when this deal comes up and I need to pull it out of the paper, pull it out of the drawer, dust it off and look at what's happening. And now I'm dealing with somebody else and oh, don't worry about it. We never do that. Doesn't hold water anymore. It needs to be in the document. So that's where we want to make sure that everything's in there and that there's nothing that we're taking on faith or trusting them that they would never actually enact that in the contract. Because when you get to the point of going to the words in the contract, like some of the rationality's gone, some of the civility's gone. Like we're now at the point where people are looking at paper and shaking in each other's face of what they will or won't do. And you don't rely on goodwill in those situations. So we want to make sure, again, the one I tucked under your pillow, you know exactly what it says, and you know that you're going to be okay, and you know that it reflects the deal that was agreed upon, and it'll stand up if it needs to. Next, assure your final agreement is better than your Batna. If you had another job offer, a competing job offer, you now have a finalized document, stack them against each other and say, how do they compare on face value, and are there intangibles that nudge me in one direction or the other? Like, okay, everything else is the same, but I really like the location of this hospital better than that one. So that's worth it to me to be at this deal and not that one. So you just want to make sure it's better. And then reflect on what could have gone better or if there are any learnings. There's a concept that I came across in one of my negotiation trainings that I thought was fascinating, and I've only been able to do it a few times, where you literally say, okay, we have an agreement that we've negotiated and both sides have agreed upon. That's done. What could we do to make this deal better for both sides? So if there's nothing else that could be done, the contract's done and it's already stood there. But if there's something else, a sweetener that they could throw in there, or something they could say, well, you know, we really wanted to do this, and if we could do that, I think that makes it better for both of us. Great, let's add it to the contract. But you don't always get that opportunity. You don't always have someone willing. They're kind of like, oh my gosh, finally we're done. I just want to move on. But if you have somebody who's willing to kind of continue the intellectual journey, there is it's a fascinating experiment sometimes to say, well, you know, I really could have gone to this point for you. Okay, so let's go to that point. What would you need for me to get there? And you can actually better the deal. The pressure's off. The deal's done. We have something that we both sign, but can we make it better for both sides? And if you can, awesome, let's do it. And so that's kind of a new thing. And you reflect on, okay, for my next negotiation, I know I'm not going to ever say this because it went bad. Or don't ever pull this piece of information out because it really pissed off the other side. You know, whatever it may be, like file it away in your filing cabinet, because this is not something you do every week. You only do it every indefinite period of time. And you just want to make sure you have that catalog to go back to say, okay, I remember last time this was not good, so I want to do it differently this time. So those are just reflecting on those learnings. Any questions on after the negotiation?
I do have a couple questions. I don't know that these relate necessarily to the after the negotiation stage, but they're on people's minds. So how do you determine what is a green or a red item for the other party?
That's where you have to practice sitting in their shoes and trying to just think through from your perspective. If I was them, would this be important to me or not? And you're not always going to be right. But what you do is you adjust the coloring during the discussion as you see the points they continue to go back to. What do they continue to reflect on? What do they keep pointing back to as something that they need to get closed? That'll tell you the relative importance. If they just kind of blow through something, oh, yeah, we can talk about that later, that's not very important to them. If they want to spend quality time in one specific section, you better believe that's an important thing to them. And it starts moving up your scale to say, this is a green for them. It's a red for me, but I'm going to make it a really, really green for them, because I'm going to talk about how painful it might be for me to give up on this point, because I see how important it is to them, and I'm going to trade it for something big on my side. So that scale can shift and move during the contract negotiation, and you just have to be looking for the indication, the signaling that they may be giving that says, this is important to me. Otherwise, you're just doing your best educated guess based on if you were sitting in their shoes, where it is, and then monitor go forward.
I assume as well you're able to use some of your perspective, given that you've done this a number of times with other similar institutions. You're able to read some of that or plan for some of that in advance because you recognize common things.
Yeah, and oftentimes I've negotiated with that particular medical practice or that particular network or that before, and I know what the sticking points were for them last time. So I'll say, look, this is going to be one they're going to want for sure. I can tell you that right now. This is one that's going to be important. This one, they're not going to care about. They've given on that in every negotiation I've had with them. They just throw that in. So we want to, that one's one that's not important to them. So is that important to us? Is it not? That's, again, you're doing the relative scaling of values.
Perfect. All right. So this may be more of a legal question. You can defer to an attorney if that's the case, but if the hospital breaks one part of the contract, does that void other parts of the contract, or are they separate?
It's going to depend on state law and all that type of stuff, but typically there's a clause in most all contracts that says a breach of one section does not void all other sections of the contract. It would depend. Sometimes they call out specific clauses that are survival clauses. It says even if we breach these 3 or 4, stay, which is another indicator of what's important to them and what's not. So it depends on the contract structure itself. Most contracts have a thing that says just because one part is either breached or unenforceable, the rest of the contract stands. So it's not typically, but it depends on whether it's material breach or whether it's a simple breach. There's all different kinds of legal terminology for the severity of what was done as to whether the rest of the contract can be held out as enforceable or not.
And again, that's said as you, not an attorney. Again, the fine print.
An attorney, yeah.
Perfect. All right, last question I have in right now. How do you deal with the claim, and she states this is likely false, that the policy is to treat all physicians of a certain specialty equally? So that's a reason they can't move forward with something.
It's good in practice, but it's a good, like, simple, go away, kid, don't bother me kind of phrase that they throw out a lot. But when you look at it, do all doctors produce at the same levels? Do all doctors do the same type of extra curricular activities within the hospital to support other functions? Like, this is where you want to trumpet your individuality and say, I'm not like every other doctor, and I'm not going to be compensated like every other doctor because I'm doing things that nobody else is, or I'm more valuable than others are. So I'm not a commodity. I'm not going to be commoditized into everybody's the same, because then you can start using that same argument against them. Well, if everybody's the same, then I should only have to produce X amount. I'm producing 15,000 RVUs. He's producing 10. We're getting the same comp. I'm going to produce 10. I'm going to take 3 months a year off. If we're all the same and you want to get the same production out of us, then great. We'll go down that path, but I don't think you're going to like the outcome. I'm different. I should be compensated differently, or I have a situation that we want to talk about as to why it makes sense for you to give this change, why you want to give me this a bit of that versus all other physicians because I'm worth it. I'm different. I have a different value to the hospital, whatever that may be. So that oftentimes this is hospital policy. We can't do this. We don't do this. You'll see in my golden rules where that kind of goes out the window. So I think you just have to ask really tough questions and then be silent and let them talk their way out of those blanket statements.
Perfect. And that relates a little bit back to the question that was asked earlier about kind of precedent for new hires, right? Like precedent for other hires in the future. I would assume similar thing there.
Well, and the point I always say is, are you going to take this contract out and share it with my fellow physicians? Because if you're not going to share it with them, I'm not going to talk about my compensation either. No one finds out about any concessions that you make to me.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you have finished negotiations before where they have explicitly told you and the doctor they cannot share the result with anyone because it is so much better than what others have.
Exactly correct. Like we had one where, for a sports analogy, we had one physician we finished negotiating with, and they signed the document. The person from the hospital said, "Congratulations, you are," in the latest vernacular, "you are the Patrick Mahomes of our hospital network. You are the highest compensated doctor for what you do. Well done. Good job. You know, don't tell anybody else because you would have a lot of people upset, but you made a good solid case, and we understand and we see the value in you as a physician. We wouldn't have agreed to it if you weren't worth it." So again, you know, people say we got to treat everyone the same. That's not true. You don't ever like hold up everyone's contracts and say, look, they're all the same. Everybody gets paid the same. So as long as they're not going to be sharing it, you're not going to be sharing it. It's our little secret that you're paying them better than everybody else.
I have another one that's come in. This is a personal passion area of mine. I am a female physician, and I'm concerned that I'll be underpaid compared to my male counterparts. How do you address this?
It happens all the time, and unfortunately, there is truth to that. It's not across the board. I don't want to stereotype, but it does happen, and I think part of it is there's a bit of it where, based on human nature, they will expect that most, and again, I don't want to offend anybody here, but that some female physicians are willing to accept the offer that's placed in front of them, and they're not going to challenge, they're not going to argue. The hospital, let's be frank, the hospital wants to pay female or male as little as possible to do the job that they're going to do. That's what's in their interest. What I do is when we look at benchmarks, the benchmarks don't say female, male. The benchmarks say this physician in this area producing at this level. So it doesn't matter female or male. This is the going rate for a physician of this specialty or of this practice type. And it's actually, I love representing or working with females because they often are underpaid. And it's great to go in and make huge improvements in their compensation structure because they were underpaid. I had one just the other day, a female physician I was talking to. She was producing in the 80th percentile, almost the 90th percentile, and she was being paid at the 5th percentile. It was like one of the most egregious underpayments I've ever seen. And when I started talking to her about it, I said, you are drastically undercompensated. She said, well, I understand, but it's my first job and I feel loyalty to the hospital. I'm like, you're making excuses for why they have been dramatically underpaying you for the entirety of your first contract. Why are you doing that? There's no reason for you to do that. You are producing at a fantastic level and they are paying you terribly. Like, don't feel sorry for them. Like, you should get a little pissed off and let's go get what you're worth. And it doesn't matter, female or male, the numbers are the numbers. And so that's what I focus on. I don't focus on gender differences or anything like that. Unfortunately, I do see where that happens, where female physicians are paid less than their male counterparts in certain areas. And we try to rectify that. We try to make it right and get you compensated exactly where you're supposed to be. And you know, in today's political climate and everything that's there, it's a pretty powerful argument to say, so looks like you're underpaying her because she's a female. That's a pretty uncomfortable position for a hospital network to be in and go, oh, no. Yeah, no, let's get it right where it needs to be in the range, right? I mean, we're not trying to throw that card on the table, but nobody wants to be on the wrong side of like, hey, we have a gender bias or we have a misalignment of our compensation strategy based on gender. Nobody wants to be in that position. So we would use that to our advantage, absolutely.
Perfect. All right, we've cleared out the questions we have, so I'll move on to the golden rules. We are at we've got about 10 minutes to our set time. So we'll go through the golden rules, and then if you guys send in questions, if we've got more questions, if Greg's got a little more time, we can answer those. If not, like I said, we'll follow up with you after and make sure you get your answers.
Yep. So these are my golden rules of negotiation. If you want to advance the next slide. These are just things in life you should keep in mind. Almost everything is negotiable. I was talking through Lauren with this, and sometimes my wife gets a little embarrassed. I'll negotiate with the guy at Best Buy. People think the price is posted, that's the price you pay. But everything's negotiable. And I'll give you the rest of that Best Buy example here in a minute. But your chance of success is directly related to your preparation for that negotiation. The more time you spend, the more research you do, the more homework you do, the more comfortable you are with the information you're going in with, the better you're going to be. The worst that someone can say is no. This is that negotiation. So simple negotiation. I go up to the counter at Best Buy and they put it down. They say it's $225 or whatever. And I go, you don't have any, that's the best you can do. You don't have any discounts or manager specials or anything you can do. And the guy goes, like literally 50% of the time they go, oh yeah, I can give you a manager coupon. It's 20% off. It cost me 10 seconds of my life and it just saved me $50. That's the worst you can say is no, I don't have anything I can do. Okay. I was going to pay $225 anyway. I paid $225. Didn't hurt me anything. And the next point, asking for something or opening a negotiation is not offensive. The guy doesn't go, get the heck out of my store. I'm not selling this to you because you asked me for a discount. It just doesn't happen. People, you can joke it off. You can laugh it off. People can say whatever. Sometimes I'll go up to a counter and go, look, you have this thing here. On Amazon, it says I can get the exact same thing for $50 cheaper. Can you do something about that? Oh yeah, we can price match. They punch it in, done. Now I'm walking out with the product now instead of 2 days later. Cost me nothing. Worst they could have said is no, we don't price match. Then I have the decision to say, do I walk and wait 2 days? Or do I say, I'll take it anyway? So again, asking for something or opening a negotiation is not effective. That applies in this situation 100% of the time. They can say we don't negotiate compensation. Well, you just open a negotiation because you told me you don't. I'm going to try to get you to do it. And it's not offensive. I always look at it this way. When I'm hiring someone to work for me and I offer them a compensation, if they don't negotiate with me, I'm hiring the wrong person. So it also says I have business savvy. I understand my value. I'm an asset to this company because I have a mind for business. I have a mind for how value is derived, and it's not offensive. Know your value and strengths. Know what unique value you bring and leverage it. Understand what your leverage points are. There is always some sort of leverage in the negotiation. Otherwise, they wouldn't be negotiating with you. If you had nothing to offer with them, they would not talk to you. If they're talking to you, you have something to offer. Therefore, there's a value for them in entering into this transaction, this negotiation with you. So they will. So know that and know what that is and understand your leverage points. You can push harder than you think. You can start to get a feel for someone asked earlier in one of the questions, how do you know when you've reached the end of what they're willing to offer? The concessions get smaller. The tone gets a little more aggressive. They start to say things like, well, that's the best we can do. Okay, I've got a couple of toes dangling over the edge, but I don't have them all the way to where I want to go because there's probably a little bit more to get. And again, you don't ever want to push in an ultimatum way. You don't ever want to push in a way that leaves you no out if they say not going to happen. You want to be able to push in a way that if you find you're pushing too hard and they're starting to teeter over the edge, you can back up and you can pull them back onto the ledge and say, okay, got it. So know how hard you can push, but you can push harder than you think. Go to the next slide. I think there's a couple more. Tentatively commit. This is what we talked about before. If I was to do that, what would that look like? If I could agree to this today, could you do this for me? Could I get a 10% discount? Can I get it tomorrow? You said you can't deliver till next week. If I agree to it now, can you get it to me tomorrow? Know what's relatively important to you. Tentatively commit to see if you can get what you want before you say, yes, I'll do it. Relationship may or may not matter. I'm not going to talk to this car dealer again, so I don't really care. It's my mother-in-law. We're negotiating over, her coming to watch the kids for the weekend. Yeah, I probably want to really value that relationship. You always have some kind of leverage. Know your limits. If I'm an individual consumer and I'm trying to negotiate with Microsoft on the cost of a Windows license, the limits of my negotiation leverage are probably more than if I'm negotiating with the guy that wants to come trim my trees because it's a limited scope of who he's got to work with. So I can push him a little harder than I can Microsoft. Know the power of no. I'm not going to be able to agree to that. Or even better, I don't see how I could agree to that, because I didn't say I'm not agreeing to it, but I'm saying I don't see how I can. And that will either get them to pivot, they may change, they say, well, what if we did this, or what if we did that? But saying no has a lot of power. It's a stop sign you throw up, and they have to figure out a way to go around it, to come back to it, or to get you to pull the stop sign up and keep the conversation going. So know the power of saying no. One of the greatest things in the car dealership game is the walkout, right? Okay, thanks, I'm done. Wait, no. Let's see, we can go farther. They might even chase you out in the parking lot. The power of no works. Listen and learn. The more, they always say God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them in that proportion. The more you can listen in a conversation and absorb information, the better you're going to be able to get a successful result. If you're talking 90% of the time and listening 10% of the time, you're the one that's giving away information that you don't need to give away. So you want to listen and learn. And then when someone says, tell me the one word that describes you when you're on your game in a negotiation, I say it's agile. I can respond. I can pivot. I can change. They hit me with a piece of information I wasn't ready with. I swing to this side. I come up with, they say something that's to my advantage, I pounce on it. You know, you really want to be able to move through the conversation to your best advantage. And the way you do that is through keeping these things in mind and being prepared, so that you know the information better than they do. You're going to be able to respond in a better fashion than they will to something that unexpectedly happens in the negotiation. So stay agile, be ready to pivot and move, call the timeout if you need to, and just, know that there's nothing forcing you into agreeing to a bad deal. You may think they have all the power, you may think they have all the leverage. It's 99% of the time it's not the case. You have leverage, you have a strength, you have a unique value proposition. We just need to find what it is and leverage the heck out of that so that we can get you into the right place. I think that's the end of my golden rules, and that's the end of my presentation. I hope this has been valuable to you. I'm happy to answer any additional questions. I do have a little bit more time if there's any late-breaking questions that are coming in. And I'd love to help any of you in any of your individual negotiations that you may be thinking through, working through. I think it's a unique service that Vestia offers that not many other financial advisory firms do. So we're happy to help in any negotiation. I probably am not the best one for you to call in for a negotiation with your mother-in-law about coming to watch your kids for the weekend. But short of that, we're here to help, and we're here to help you achieve wealth without regret. And one of the ways you do that is by knowing you have a solid contract, you're being paid for your value, and if everything goes south, you're still going to be okay because the contract you signed, you're protected. So that's my finishing statement. Happy to answer any other questions.
Perfect. So for those of you who do have to jump off, we are right on our 90-minute commitment. There will be a recording of this available. So if you have colleagues who were not able to attend tonight, who have contract negotiations or renegotiations coming up, feel free to share that with them. We would love to get this out to as many doctors as can benefit from this information. If you're interested in Greg for either help with your individual contract or to do a custom presentation for your group. So I know a lot of you are leaders of resident fellow groups, of different interest groups or professional groups within your specialty. You can email us, so either to get in contact with Greg individually or to do a group presentation, hello@vestia.com. hello@vestia.com. I'll send that out with the recording as well. We've got some other questions coming in, so if you need to jump off, great. Otherwise, Greg said he's got a few more minutes, so I will continue to ask your questions. All right. What specific resources are available to identify what the going market rate is before going into the negotiation?
So one that we use pretty heavily is the MGMA, which is what I would consider one of the most exhaustive medical compensation databases that's out there. It gets updated annually, so it stays up with the times, and it gives you all those different abilities to drill down to your specific specialty, to your specific region, look at it on a nationwide basis. So that's one that we use pretty heavily. There are a number of other indexes out there that we run across at times. Like I've said, we have our data and a hospital will throw out theirs and say, well, we use this standard or that standard. Great, share it with me. But the one we subscribe to at Vestia is MGMA.
Perfect. Will a hospital or an academic center be offended if a physician hired you as their negotiator, or is that a common practice?
I would say it's not a common practice, but I've never had someone be offended by the practice. The simple way that I say you can introduce it is, hey, I work with my financial advisory firm. One of the services they offer is contract negotiation services. I've asked them to help me through this process. So either they're advising me through this process or they will be representing me in this process. And then you step out and I step in. I've negotiated with CEOs of hospitals. I've negotiated with business level managers. I've negotiated at all the different levels. I have yet to have one say, I'm horribly offended by the fact that you're even talking to me. It may be different for them. They may be a little caught off guard, but typically what I do is I also offer to them, look, I can help you get to a closed contract faster because I understand all the language and everything that's in this contract. And we can go through certain parts of the contract fairly expeditiously. So I can help speed up the process. And again, sometimes it helps them because now there's not this tension of like, I'm the physician that they're trying to hire. I'm some guy they're never going to see again. So for their side, relationship doesn't matter if they have listened to anything I've said or they've read anything else. They may say, oh, this is great. I don't have to worry about offending this doctor we're trying to hire. I can talk to this guy and see if we can get a deal done. So I have yet to have it expressed to me or have anybody come back later and say, wow, the hospital really didn't like that you represented me. I've never had that. I think it shows a level of, I don't want to use the word sophistication, but business savvy that's out there that says, look, I'm a doctor. I know what I do well, and this is not my core strength. So I'm using someone to do that for me. It'd be like, I think this is kind of the formative stages of agents for doctors, if you will. But, sports guys, do they say, I'm offended that, you've contracted your agent to negotiate on your behalf? No, it's just common practice. It's not common practice yet in the medical field. I think Vestia is kind of pioneering something here that it could become more standard, but they might be taking a little bit aback. But I think that simple introduction that I provided is what I've told people to do. And everybody said, oh, they were fine with it. So yeah, they're going to be contacting
It's an easy way to absolve yourself of a little bit of responsibility too. Like, oh, it's my financial advisor pushing me to do this, So, someone's clarifying. Go ahead.
Okay. No.
Someone's clarifying that. So this is clearly a fresh idea. That's not going to potentially push them away from hiring you as the doctor if they bring you in as their negotiator.
It has not been my experience where that's been the case. I try to diffuse the situation pretty quickly when I get on the call, or if I am corresponding with the person. I say, look, our job is to make sure the contract they sign is solid. You want to make sure you're getting what you're looking for in your potential future physician. They want to make sure that they're partnering with the right firm for the foreseeable future of their career. So we're here to provide advice and make sure that they understand exactly what's in the contract, which makes them a better employee because they know exactly what they're signing up for. And most of the time they go, oh, that's great. Yeah, let's work through this. The only time they kind of maybe regret it is when we get to the really hard points and we're hammering through the final details and they're writing a check that's bigger than they wanted to hire their doctor. But that's what we're here for. So.
Perfect. I have an offer from a practice that was extended by the CEO, but I've been communicating with the department chair who has asked me what questions I have about the contract. Who do I work with who do I negotiate with is what she's asking.
I would negotiate probably with the CEO because that's the person who's going to be able to affect the changes. I don't think the department head usually they don't have much say in what compensation looks like. They have more say in like the the day-to-day responsibilities, the assignments, the stuff like that, but they typically don't get involved in that. It's usually a way for hospitals or firms to, again, divert the attention and say, hey, go ask them if they have any questions about it, because you're their potential future boss, and so they may not express to you, and that person would then, all they would most likely be able to say is, well, let me go talk to the CEO about what we can do there. And now you're in the used car sales business where, let me go talk to my manager and see what they have to say, and that's not the best dynamic. So I would say, hey, I've read through the contract. I want to make sure we can get through this in the most expeditious manner. Nothing against you, but I'm assuming that the CEO is the one I'm going to have to close the deal with. So I'll just take any questions I have to them. But maybe, and then you could say, but I do have some questions about the day-to-day, the way things are run, things like that. So you say, look, I know what your area is, and I'll ask you about your area. I know this is really the CEO's job, so I'll spare you from having to play the go-between, and I'll just take my questions directly to them. That's how I would most likely approach it.
Correct. And then I have you already given up a lot if your contract expires before the negotiations finish?
No, typically the contracts have an auto renewal clause, or they're going to keep paying you at the same rate. I've very rarely seen where someone says, oh, your contract's expired, please pack your bags and walk out the front door. Unless that's their tactic or their strategy and they're dragging their feet because they intend to say you don't have a contract anymore. But I haven't come across that situation. And it's, again, it's slightly to your disadvantage, but not enough to really, I wouldn't change my strategy because it's in an expired status. I would not do anything differently. I would not ask for less. I would still go after everything that's there. I just think it shows if you're the one forcing the agenda, like in advance of the contract, it basically shows like, hey, I'm on top. I'm not to say this person's not on top of it, because I know the world is crazy and things happen. But if you are, it might signal to them, hey, look, I'm monitoring this. I know the contract's coming up. I want to make sure this happens. There's all kinds of, I negotiate expired contracts all the time. It's not an unusual thing. So I don't think you've lost anything. If I was given a preference, I would choose to do it in advance versus after it's expired. Because there is that unlikely event that they could throw the ultimate trump card. I've never seen it happen, but that's the only small reason why I choose to do it in front.
Perfect. That is all the questions that we have. You all have been a great audience. Thank you so much for sending all of your questions and made this much more, I think, valuable for everyone who has attended. Again, hello@vestia.com if you want to talk more about Greg's help in one area or another. And we thank you for joining us tonight. Hopefully this helps you take a step forward in your wealth without regret.